Okay, so now here on the board, I've recreated the diagram on page 143 of your book, okay? And if you don't have it in front of you, that's fine. This is simply the long run average cost curve, okay, or average total cost curve, okay? We're going to derive that, okay? Now remember, what's the difference between the short run and the long run? In the short run, the amount of capital the firm has is fixed, right? Whereas in the long run, the firm is free to change up all of its factors of production as it sees fit, okay? So in the short run, labor can change, but capital cannot, whereas in the long run, both capital and labor can change, okay? So, as a result, since the firm itself is able to change the amount of capital it has, we can draw a whole set of average total cost diagrams, okay? We can draw one for, say, oh, I don't know, 3 different plant sizes, okay? We can draw one for, and let's just, for the sake of assumption, for average total cost 1, let's say that that'll be 1 plant. For average total cost 2, that'll be 2 plants. And for average total cost 3, that'll be 3 plants, okay? Just in terms of the changing capital, okay? So, here I've drawn 3 curves, 3 average total cost curves. In your book, they have 5. It's still the same thing, I've just I've just taken out a few curves, okay? So, here we have average total cost curve 1, okay? Right here. Next to it, we have average total cost curve 2. And then finally, we have average total cost curve 3. The labeling of each curve, 1, 2, and 3, the labeling is at the furthest right-hand side of the cost curves, okay? So in other words, ATC1 is all the way at the end of average total cost curve 1, okay? Average total cost curve 3 is all the way at the end, okay? So how do we get the long run average total cost curve, okay? How does that get derived? Well, it's pretty easy actually. As it turns out, all you have to do is look at whether a firm would like to have higher costs or lower costs, okay? Now what do I mean by that? Initially, let's say a firm, in the short run, let's say a firm was producing here. It was producing this, Q0, that quantity of output, okay? Well, that was the short run, and this was its cost, right? That was its average total cost. Well, now it's the long run. Maybe business is booming, and they want to actually produce more. They want to increase their quantity, okay? Well, if it decides that it wants to produce this quantity, what I've labeled as Q1, this quantity, it has a pretty simple decision to make. This quantity intersects 2 of the average total cost curves that I've drawn on the board, right? The 3 at the top are still the short run average total cost curves. What we want to do is see which one is cheaper, right? You always want your costs to be lower. So if you want to produce this quantity, you can choose to produce at this cost, which is on ATC2, right? You can produce at that cost on average total cost curve number 2, or they could produce this quantity at this cost on average total cost curve 1, okay? Now, it may seem like a no-brainer, and it is, okay? Obviously, you want the lower costs, right? This is lower, this is higher, okay? So if you were going to produce this amount of output, you would want to produce, or to build, the second factory, right? You want average total cost curve 2. You don't want average total cost curve 1, okay? And I'll go back over this one more time if you're a little confused, okay? Initially we're producing at quantity 0. Well, let's say we wanted to produce at quantity 1. If you wanted to do that, quantity 1 intersects 2 of our short run average total cost curves. It intersects ATC2 here, and it intersects ATC1 here. Okay? So, which one would you rather have? Would you rather have lower average total costs, or would you rather have higher average total costs? Only a fool would say higher average total costs, right? Do you want to have high costs or low costs? You want to have the low costs. That's how you make more profit, okay? So, what you end up getting is the firm, which initially, at Q0, it was initially producing on ATC1, right? They were initially there. Now they would like to be producing here at ATC2. In other words, they want to transition from average total cost curve 1 to average total cost curve 2. How do you do that? How do you make that jump? You build more capital, right? You build another plant, another factory, what have you, okay? The point being, now you've jumped your cost curves from here to here, okay? You went from ATC1 to ATC2. Why didn't you produce here? You didn't produce there because it was irrelevant. It's a higher cost. So, all of these, let's see if they do it in your book. They don't. All of these portions, the ones with higher costs, become irrelevant. So you can just erase them. Now we're left with these three, well, here too. Now we're left with these three cost curves, okay? And it's starting to actually look like the long run average total cost curve, okay? If you were to, instead of imagining 3 average total cost curves, right? If we didn't just have ATC 1, 2, and 3, if you imagined infinity average total cost curves, okay, where you had one here, one here, one here, one here, and then you were to erase all of the non-profitable places, or all the places with higher costs the way I did, you would end up getting something that looks like this. Okay. This is where we were at, okay? Which you can already see it's starting to take on the shape of this. Which is the long run average total cost curve. Okay. The long run average total cost curve, in the beginning, average total costs are falling. I should write that up here too. Long run average total cost. LRATC, long run average total cost. Okay? In the beginning, it's starting to fall. Your long run average total costs are falling. Why are they falling? Because of something called economies of scale. We'll get to that in a minute. Then, in an intermediate position, they're the same. You have what's called constant returns to scale, okay? And that is your, no matter whether you're producing this quantity of output or this quantity of output, you have the same average total costs. Finally, your long run average total cost curve begins to slope upwards at the end because of something called diseconomies of scale, okay? Now, what are economies of scale? Your book goes through this on page 144. And 144 to 146, okay? What are some examples of economies of scale? What do we mean by that? It's simply something, an economy of scale, okay, as the definition says right here on 144. It's simply when your average total cost goes down as your quantity increases, okay? Average total cost, long run average total cost goes down as your quantity increases. What are some reasons that happens? Well, labor specialization, right? Maybe instead of, let's say you have a car factory, right? Instead of having to build the tire and then attach it, maybe you are just really good at building tires, so you can build the tire. It makes you more productive. As people get more and more productive, as we saw in the short run in our last lesson, as people get more and more productive, then costs go down, right? The marginal cost goes down, so the average total cost goes down, okay? So, as people get more productive, such as through labor specialization, you get economies of scale, which causes your average total cost to go down, okay? Another reason is managerial specialization, right? Instead of a manager managing all different areas of the factory, maybe he just manages this one section because he knows a lot about that one section. Or you get much more efficient capital, right? Instead of having a machine that wasn't that good at making tires, maybe you could make tires and hubcaps, whatever, right? Now you have a machine for each of them. You have a machine for each of them, productivity goes up, okay? So for that reason, average total cost will slope downwards. Then it flattens out when you get to constant returns to scale, okay? Once the firm has sort of reached its limit, right? Everyone's working as productively as possible. You can't get any more productive, so producing extra output, right? Producing extra quantities causes the firm to still have the same average total cost, okay? Same average total cost. Finally, you get diseconomies of scale, which is why the long run average total cost curve slopes upwards, okay? Why do you end up with diseconomies of scale? Your book says that the reason that happens, they say it's because of managerial inefficiency, okay? In other words, once the firm has gotten so big, right, it becomes really tough to manage it. If it's really tough to manage it, then you have workers over here doing one thing, you have workers over there doing another thing, and it's really hard to coordinate everyone's actions, okay? It might sound like an awkward reason to give for diseconomies of scale, and I believe it is. I'll tell you what I think that is in a minute. But the whole reason, okay, that you have an upward sloping long run average total cost curve, according to the neoclassicals, is because eventually the firm gets so big, it's producing so much stuff, that it's very hard to organize all of the production activities, okay? So productivity actually starts going down, okay? So similar to the marginal cost curve, right? You'll remember from the previous lesson, the previous lecture, as productivity goes down, right? You have too many cooks in the kitchen or something like that, okay? Obviously this is the long run. You can't have too many cooks in the kitchen because you can just build a new kitchen. But eventually what they're saying is if you build too many kitchens, well then you're not going to be able to coordinate everything that's going on in all of them. and so therefore productivity goes down, that's a diseconomy of scale, which causes the long run average total cost curve to slope back upwards. Okay? So the most any firm would ever produce would be right here. Okay? That's the most anyone would ever produce, because any other quantity, you have increasing costs. Right? If your costs are going up, it makes no sense to be producing that. You don't want to be producing under a condition of increasing costs. Okay? So, this is the long run average total cost curve. It's derived from a bunch of average total cost curves, as you saw on page 142, 143 and 144, where you have a bunch of average total cost curves. And then if you take out all of the unprofitable sections, right? Why would you produce here if you could produce there? So you simply take these all out. And if you take them all out, you get a nice smooth, long-run average total cost curve. Okay? So that's where it comes from. The long-run average total cost curve is nothing more than an amalgamation of the short-run average total cost curves. Okay? But now you can move in between those cost curves because this is the long run. Right? You can hire as much labor and you can buy as much capital as you would like to. Okay? So, that is where the long-run average total cost curve comes from, and it slopes downwards because of diseconomies of scale, and then it slopes downwards because of economies of scale, and then it slopes upwards because of diseconomies of scale. Now, I mentioned that neoclassical economics says that diseconomies of scale is the reason the long-run average total cost curve slopes upward, and that's why a firm will never produce anything more than right here. Okay? They say it was diseconomies of scale. I think that's disingenuous. For this reason, I mentioned in our first lecture that neoclassical economics was developed to directly repudiate Karl Marx. Okay? Marx basically said, whoa, capitalism's dangerous, you gotta watch out for it. And neoclassicals, their goal was to say, no, capitalism is the greatest thing that's ever happened to the world. Okay, fair enough. Doesn't matter which side you take in that. I'm just saying that's what those two groups said. Okay? Now, one of the things Marx said was that the corporation, the firm, would get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger over time until it was basically running the economy. Okay? Whether he was right or wrong is debatable, but Walmart and some other firms are actually quite large these days. They seem to be running the economy. Okay? But that's just my personal take on it. For these purposes, neoclassicals, right, if they're completely against Marx, well, what they need to say is, no. Corporations will not grow incredibly large, okay? Corporations will grow, but eventually they will stop growing. In fact, they'll stop right here. Why are they going to stop right there? Well, it's because of the diseconomies of scale, right? Once you get so big, it's really hard to coordinate all of your activities. Okay? So you start becoming slightly inefficient, and who would want to be on the upward sloping portion of the long run average total cost curve? Okay? So while neoclassicals say that it's diseconomies of scale that causes the long run average total cost curve to slope upwards, and that's why firms will only produce to here, I personally believe, and I read some research on this, a lot of other people also believe, they created that to say to Marx, basically, no, corporations won't grow and get out of control. Marx, you're completely wrong, okay? Because it does sort of seem, if you think about it, the whole reason that firms grow inefficient is because they're too big. They have too much market power, so therefore they become inefficient. If anything, as you get market power, you become more efficient because you dominate the market. Okay? Walmart is absolutely huge. Walmart doesn't have an incredible amount of managerial inefficiency. Okay? So that seems to be an exception to this rule. Okay? But regardless, you're not going to be tested on that. I'm just saying right now, you need to know where the average, the long run average total cost curve is derived from. Okay? Derived from those various short run average total cost curves. And then you need to know why the long run average total cost curve has the shape that it does. Okay? It gets economies of scale at the beginning, and then it starts sloping upwards at the end because of diseconomies of scale. Okay? You need to know, some examples of what could cause an economy of scale and a diseconomy of scale. Okay? So that's going to wrap up chapter 6. That'll finish up our week 3 lesson. Okay? Next lecture, we're going to be talking about perfect competition. Your book refers to it as pure competition. I call it perfect competition. Okay? So we'll do that next time, and I guess get started on exam 2.